Hi, so we're going to talk about developmentally appropriate practice. And here are just some questions to have you think about as we go through our discussion. When you hear the words developmentally appropriate practice, what do you think? What would you expect to see in developmentally appropriate classrooms serving different various age groups? And here's a definition. Developmentally appropriate practice, carefully planned, intentional teaching based on what is known about the developmental stages and ages of the children being taught. The goal is to bring children to their full potential, cognitively, socially, emotionally, and physically. And you should be identifying these highlighted words as those um, learning domains we've talked about before. Remember PIES, it represents physical, intellectual, which is the same as cognitive, PIE, emotional, S, social, the learning domains that we target for early childhood education. So developmentally appropriate practice has three core considerations: knowing about child development and learning, knowing what is individually appropriate, so knowing the child, and knowing what is culturally important, knowing the culture that is represented by that child in the classroom, their family, their community, and what their life outside of the classroom consists of. So these three core considerations are separated out, but they fundamentally are connected. And in order to have a developmentally appropriate practice, you need to know these three things to develop that learning experience that will be impactful for that individual child. All right, so there are 12 principles of child development and learning that NIAC, NAEYC, lays out. And they emphasize the high quality teaching and learning experience for children from birth through age 8. A developmentally appropriate program uses strength-based, play-based approaches to joyfully engage in learning. Here are the 5 guidelines for developmentally appropriate practice: creating a caring community of learners, teaching to enhance development and learning, constructing appropriate curriculum, assessing children's learning and development, and establishing reciprocal relationships with families. These teaching practices are designed to support each and every child's optimum learning and development. So the 10 effective developmental appropriate teaching strategies is found on this link, and it looks like this. And it's important to consider what the children already know and can do, and the learning goals for the specific situation when we're talking about teaching strategies. And you want to remain flexible and observant. We can determine which strategy may be most effective. And then often, if one strategy doesn't work, you'll try another, and another may work better for the child. So developmentally appropriate practice, understanding where a child is in their development is super important. We need to remember that young children tend to be concrete thinkers, right? They can't think in abstract ways. They are egocentric thinkers. They tend to see the world strictly from their own perspective. Young children generally have centered thinking. They process one thing at a time. Young children tend to confuse appearances with reality. And this is a great example. They might think their thumb is bigger than the moon because their thumb can cover the moon. So to provide developmentally appropriate instruction, you should understand how preschool age children typically think and behave. And recognize that each child has different strengths, and you work towards developing each child's ability to self-regulate. That means to manage their emotions. And that's why social emotional development and learning is so important at this age. And you can go to this link and see a video. We're not going to do that at this moment. So developmentally appropriate approaches is understanding how children learn. The children learn best when adults recognize their individual needs and interests. Children are encouraged to explore what excites their curiosity. And young children learn best through a combination of explaining and experience, right? You're not just going to lecture young children. They need to have the experience to really learn. You want to encourage children to use their senses to feel, taste, see, and experience new things and concepts. You want to provide hands-on experiences to help children explore the world directly. And you want to give children simple directions, one step at a time. When we think about young children and their learning, we can look at Gardner's multiple intelligence theory and understand a child's learning preference. The theory states that each person has a different way of learning and different intelligences they use in their daily lives. All people possess some level of each of these intelligence, but most will experience a more dominant intelligence, which impacts the way they learn and interact with the world around them. These multiple intelligences can be nurtured and strengthened based on each person's learning style. And you can go here and see how to promote all types of learning. You want to recognize that children are intelligent in different ways and help children develop and become aware of their own strength, right? And you want to identify and use children's strengths to address their weakness. If a child is good at expressing himself or herself through sound and music, but doesn't easily grasp math concepts, then try using musical rhythms to demonstrate concepts of math, like patterns. So what does an encouraging, developmentally appropriate classroom look like? It uses emergent curriculum, and that is curriculum based on child's interest. There's creative art and journals. There's manipulatives based for cognitive activities, for math, for learning letters, right? Things that children can explore, touch, use their senses to understand these cognitive concepts. There's abundant learning centers where children can play and engage in the learning process. You have small group experiences, you have large group experiences. And there's child choice in the daily program, where children choose where they're going to play and what they're going to learn. So these scenarios can ask you what might developmental appropriate look like in the infant and toddler classroom, in the preschool classroom, in a kindergarten classroom, and then in the elementary classroom. I'm not going to go through these because I need to keep the narration short, but you can go through and pause and ask yourself what you might do in the situation, and then reread what the teacher did to promote developmentally appropriate practice. Again, developmentally appropriate practice promotes all types of learning. You recognize that a child has intelligent in different ways, right? You help children develop and become aware of their own strengths, and you identify and use children's strengths to address their weaknesses. And so here's a question. Are developmentally appropriate guidelines appropriate for children with special needs? You can watch this YouTube video, but again, yes, developmentally appropriate guidelines are understanding that children are intelligent in different ways. And when we think of children with special needs, we recognize that they are intelligent, and we use that intelligence to help them learn and develop using their strengths, right? And then we also use their strength to address their weakness. Again, if a child learns through music, use music to talk about math or literacy or social emotional skills. If a child learns through their senses, how can you use that to encourage these different physical, intellectual, emotional, and social development? So here's what's coming up next week. And I hope this narration PowerPoint helps you. Reach out to me if you have any questions. Have a good night.